Hey, my name is Aksel Biørn-Hansen, and in this talk I will present a study I've done together with Wolmet, Barendregt and Andersson, where we investigated people's reactions towards using a new carbon calculator. And this might be a bit redundant, but climate change is one of the most pressing societal challenges in our time. To tackle this challenge, a lot of effort has been made over the years into creating tools that can inform people about how their behavior impacts their environment. Carbon calculators are one type of such tool available today, which people can use to calculate and get feedback on their carbon footprint. Typically, you are asked to input information about your lifestyle, and then the calculator will output a carbon footprint in CO2 equivalents. And carbon calculators are usually static, meaning that they provide only a timestamp of your footprint at a certain point in time. And here's some examples of carbon calculators online. It's a World Wildlife Foundation. This is a Swedish one, Climate Account, it's called. And this is yet another one. So, just briefly, common features today are visualization of the actual footprint, comparisons to different averages, tips and pledges, groups, as well as options for carbon offsetting. All of these features can be related back to intervention techniques from behavioral psychology. Carbon calculators have been heavily criticized on several points. Foremost, carbon calculators base much of their features upon the assumption that people are rational agents who will, with the right information, act more environmentally friendly. There's also a lack of empirical support showing a strong relationship between awareness and willingness to act. This is called usually the knowledge-action gap. Calculators are also heavily focused and puts a lot of responsibility on the individual. To continue here, the effects of using carbon calculators on behavior are also inconclusive. Some studies report actual emission reductions, while others only find increased awareness. One possible explanation is the lack of social influence when interacting with tools like this. We humans are ultimately social beings, and in most cases, modify our opinions, attitudes, and beliefs to resemble or be more like others. The approach of calculating carbon emissions among existing calculators have also been criticized for not being able to capture the full carbon footprint of individuals, with the actual consumption being left out of the equation. Typically, calculators are limited in scope and capture only energy use, transportation habits, and diet, but not what people actually spend their money on. Relating to these aspects of social influence and the missing piece of consumption when calculating emissions, providing feedback and calculations in larger social settings beyond measuring individual behavior is a rather unexplored area of carbon calculators. There's also limited work on the use of more data-intensive approaches to calculating emissions, such as using financial data or integrating with other services such as Uber or airplane companies. So, in this study, we aim to explore these aspects in more detail by studying people's reactions toward using a new kind of carbon calculator called Svalna. And it's a mobile application, as you can see on the picture. And Svalna uses a new approach to calculating and providing feedback. Through the use of financial transaction data in combination with user-generated data, Svalna can continuously provide reliable estimates of users' consumption behavior with high accuracy. In essence, the carbon calculator can calculate emissions per krona, Swedish krona, for different consumption categories. This approach makes it possible to examine individual purchases from the user's bank account and estimate emissions based on what was bought. This eliminates the gap between experienced and actual consumption. On top of this, Svalna encompasses a social dimension, with the user being able to form groups with friends and see their combined emission, compare themselves to others, set a common goal, and so on. Just to quickly describe how it works, the calculator makes use of three main types of data in order to calculate emissions. the user fills out a climate profile about their lifestyle and habits, and this is combined with transaction data from the user's bank account as well as with registry data, such as energy declaration on the user's house or home, resulting in a carbon footprint in CO2 equivalents. It is also possible to use Svalna without connecting your bank account to the app, and in that case, the footprint provided is based upon the climate profile as well as registry data. And here's some quick screenshots from the app at the time of our study, where you can, in this case, drill down into your emissions and look at different categories and transactions. And here's another one of the group feature, where you can get an overview of the collective emissions on the left and compare yourself to the rest of the group on the right. With this as a starting point, we conducted an in-depth interview study in 2 parts with 4 participants who had never used Svalna before. And this work was guided by the 2 following research questions. What kind of first-time experience do people have when interacting with Svalna? And what kind of longer-term experience do people have when interacting with Svalna? And to investigate what kind of first-time experience people have, we gave the participants an initial introduction to the carbon calculator. Participants were asked to try out the app using a Think Aloud protocol, and this was followed by a short debriefing interview afterwards. We then kindly asked the participants to use Svalna as much as they wanted for the 2 to 3 next weeks. And to investigate the longer-term experience of interacting with Svalna, we conducted follow-up interviews with the same participants 2 to 3 weeks after the introduction in order to capture their experience of using Svalna in a more unsupervised manner. And now I will present some of our findings. The 2 sessions with participants uncovered a lot of interesting information, and I will not be able to go through all of the results because we don't have time, but I want to highlight some of the key insights that was found. To give a brief overview of the usage, in the 2 to 3 weeks up until the follow-up interview, the participants spent fairly little time with the app. Most participants said they connected their bank and spent time trying to understand their own footprints, and very few used other parts of the app, such as exploring the group feature, for reasons I will touch upon in the next slides. And I will now present 3 main themes that emerge in our data, and that is dissonance between app and real life, sensitivity towards social interactions, and challenges with facilitating recurrent use over time. So the first theme in our data relates to the participants' reactions to how Svalna calculates emissions. While the participants were overall quite positive toward the idea of connecting the bank account to the app, the participants who chose to connect the bank voiced doubt and skepticism about the numbers provided. The main reason was that transactions often were wrongly categorized by the system. For instance, a large transfer to a savings account could be categorized as food, and that would result in a high carbon footprint. And the miscategorization of transactions led to frustration and the need to manually correct errors. Another issue is that Svalna is not capable of capturing a complete picture of a person's life and actions, and this creates a gap between what the app shows and what goes on in everyday life. So maybe you bought pizza for all your friends, and that total cost is still counted on you in the app, with no possibility to share or split up the transaction. And the same goes if you live in a shared household, for instance. And these issues led several participants to mistrust the results and impacted their use of the app. 2 participants explicitly stated that they did not use other features because of these issues and wanted to first understand and have control over their own footprint before comparing themselves to others. Participants also showed sensitivity towards social interactions. They had mixed feelings and were skeptical towards sharing their own carbon footprint with others. One participant said she was not proud of her own footprint. Another one said she had no interest. But it also really depended on what they wanted to share. They didn't want to share complete footprint or details about transactions, but rather trends or change in footprint. Despite the low usage of the group feature among the participants, several expressed a willingness to be part of a group still, but not with anyone. They wanted to be part of a group with friends, but maybe not family, and they wanted to compare themselves to similar people, providing more relevant comparison than with people not leading similar lives. The participants also saw a potential in groups and thought it could be a great tool to kickstart conversations and as a basis for discussion. Several participants noted that they imagined the app could be integrated in social and educational activities. Study Circus was one example. This type of integrations has been done in previous research on carbon calculators, combining the use of a calculator with other measures such as meeting with peers and experts, provisions of newsletters, and so on. And these studies report interesting findings and concrete reductions, which could be interesting to explore using Svanla. As I mentioned earlier, the participants spent varying amount of time with the app during our study. A key reason was the lack of motivation or interest. One participant said she knew what she needed to do in order to reduce her footprint. I did not feel like she needed to follow up her footprint in detail. Another participant highlighted that he saw a risk or a danger that people will only use the app once if there's nothing more to keep the questions alive. He said he thinks there's a risk that the app becomes a happening, a one-time occurrence, and that people might not return due to not seeing any value in opening the app again. So, I also want to point out several limitations of a study. We are aware that our sample size of 4 participants is very small, and that the limited use of the app by participants means that we can only provide tentative answers into this topic. We can therefore not really say anything about the effectiveness of Svanla, but that was also not the aim with the study. It was meant as an explorative probe into this type of technology. Considering all the above, our studies show that it is important to consider and focus on finding ways to make people trust the calculations that a calculator provides. More information does not automatically lead to more trust if people notice mistakes or doubt the correctness of the estimates, and mistrusting results can hinder further use of the calculator. Additionally, our results show that what kind of data that is being shared in a group is extremely important to consider, given how delicate the balance is between sharing too much and too little data. This may be most relevant in cases where users connect a bank account or other very detailed data sets on behavior. Interesting groups might also depend on what kind of people one is grouped with. As in the case with our participants, being part of a group and being compared to others leading similar lives was important. Promoting recurrent use and long-term engagement was also mentioned as a challenge, and the introduction of groups and the use of transaction data is a promising start, but additional functionality might be needed to retain users over time. Thank you. If you have any questions, please contact me.